In those days, the Crest was in service to the Shade, protectors of Heartvale. Davenar has thus far lived up to my expectations in its differences from Heartvale. The streets are more cramped, and the buildings tower taller. The streets of Heartvale bustle, but these streets are teeming with travelers, merchants, and criminals. I witnessed at least a dozen pickpockets in the first few moments we arrived on the docks. Winestone and his crew have found lodgings at the Shivering Swan, an inn of unknown repute in Everall's Purse, across the canal from Mudside. It appears to be sufficient for our needs, and Iron Gull has already set up a watch schedule to ensure some of our number are always on alert. The lieutenant has taken to going out on long walks, and though I can see that it bothers Iron Gull, he has not yet convinced her to take anyone with her. In the days since our arrival, we have not entered Mudside, as it is being securely patrolled by the Grey Scarves, Davenar's city watch. We have been told that the neighborhood is under strict quarantine, and anyone who goes in will not be coming out again. I doubt very much that is the case, but we have yet to make inroads with any of the criminal factions in the city. The longer we are here, the more likely the Vidala will discover our presence. When that happens, if it hasn't already, I expect our lives will become far more exciting. The soldiers are eager for a straight-up fight, but I fear we'll be lurking around in the shadows for longer than any of us care to. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, the Crest attempt to connect with Erdira's Shade contact in the city. Find out what happens on episode 52, Introductions. Last time, the Andanya arrived in Davenar, and before it could make its way through the spines into the harbor, it was boarded by a Davenaran military ship for a standard inspection. The officer who conducted the inspection refused the ship entry, claiming that he did not want mercenaries running around circumventing the laws of Davenar, but really it was because he saw that they were coming out of Heartvale and he had very much a grudge against them. Steward Seta appealed to the captain of the Davenaran ship, and because the Drift have an arrangement with Davenar that allows them passage to and from, the captain agreed to allow them to pass into the city on one condition: that the Crest grease the wheels of bureaucracy, which they did. As they entered the harbor, Ben recognized a ship that looked as though it had been built in Heartvale, but was not flying any colors related to Heartvale, and it got him curious. He didn't really have time to look into that ship when they landed, because they immediately started sending out scouts to try and find a place where they could hole up and use as a base of operations. He, Arid, and Orchid found an inn called the Shivering Swan in Everall's Purse, which is directly across from the neighborhood of Mudside. Meanwhile, Destrian Vidala was at the docks watching as they disembarked and followed them through the city, discovering where they were housed. At the end of the episode, we saw Lephalia walking the streets using the Claw of Vargosh to try and track down where the Vidala were located. And in so doing, alerted the mother of the Vidala to her presence and the presence of the Crest in general. That is where we left off with our heroes. And as we come back into this scene of them finding a base of operations, we know that the name of this inn is the Shivering Swan, but I think we should maybe establish some details about it. And I think to do that, we should roll up a name for this innkeeper. Now, my natural inclination would be to go to Maze Rats, but I don't want necessarily the names to be too similar to names that I've rolled up in Heartvale, because even though there is some cultural similarity between Davenar and Heartvale, they are two very different places. So I'm going to go to the great book of random tables from Dice Geeks and roll on some random human name tables here. So first of all, let's go ahead and roll a d6, and 1, 2, or 3 will roll on the female names table. 4, 5, or 6 will roll on the males. 3 on the female names. So we're going to roll a d100. I got 1. So we're looking at Lynn, Marigold, or Braden. I like Marigold. I feel like Marigold is a good innkeeper name. Now, let's go ahead and go over to Maze Rats now, and let's just... I don't think we need to roll up a whole list of appearances and everything like that, but maybe let's do a physical detail here, and maybe a mannerism. So physical detail, we've got 2 and 6. Dreadlocks. So Marigold has dreadlocks. And let's see, what is a mannerism? 6 and 5, very loud. Dreadlocks and very loud. Okay, so I think I've got a picture of what this individual looks like. They've been staying at the Shivering Swan now for a few days. And every day they've sort of gone out, asked questions, looked around the city, tried to gather information. But I don't think that they've quite gotten anything solid yet, other than just a sense of the city itself. On this particular evening, Ben returns from the streets and enters the Shivering Swan and settles in at the bar. I think the woman behind the bar sort of shuffles over. She's a larger woman with darker skin and these beautifully intricate dreadlocks hanging down her back. There are all sorts of beads and other tokens woven into her hair, and she walks over to where Ben is sitting and she says, "Hello, love. Back again, I see. What can I get for you tonight?" What would Ben drink? We know he drinks ale because of his friend Merrick. Wine makes sense for this sort of Mediterranean feel of this area. But are there like spirits? Are there like whiskeys and other stuff like that, distilled spirits? Or is it just going to be wine or something like that? It may seem trivial, but is there whiskey in the city of Davenar? Let's say 50-50. I'm going to roll on the fate chart because why not? 80, which is a yes, there is. So I think Ben says, "Good evening, Marigold. I've gotten a taste for the Davenarian whiskey. I'll take a glass of that, if you will." "Oh, a glass of the whiskey. Excellent. Excellent. Good. It's distilled by my cousin who lives down in the vaults. He does a nice job, doesn't he?" Ben nods and says, "Yes, he certainly does." So she pulls out a bottle of this amber liquid and pours it into a small tumbler and then slides it across to him. She says, "You look tired, love. Having a rough day?" Ben shrugs, looks over at the musician in the corner who's tuning his instrument, and then looks back at Marigold and says, "Just more questions than answers, unfortunately." And this conversation is in Davinaran. I think Marigold speaks the trade language. She'd have to as an innkeeper in this sort of mercantile city. But this conversation is happening in Davinaran. I think this is something that happened the first day they arrived. She started speaking to Ben in the trade language, and Ben returned her questions in Davinaran. And so I think she is sort of humoring him as they have this exchange and says, "You know, for a lad from Hartvale, your accent is pretty good. You certainly know your way around our tongue." Ben chuckles and says, "I did have a good education." She smiles and says, "Well, tell me, what do you think of our city? Now that you've been here a few days, it seems like you've been exploring quite a bit of it. What really brings you here from Hartvale? Not many folks who grew up in Hartvale, who lived in Hartvale and, well, if you'll excuse me, have your manor come to our fair city. So tell me, what brings you here?" Ben looks at her and says, "My company has business here, and I go where the company goes. But I must admit, I find Davenar fascinating. As a child of Hartvale, as someone who grew up in that city, viewing Davenar as our rival and enemy," and he kind of like looks around and maybe speaks a little bit quieter and says, "and who has fought against Davinaran ships in recent years during the war. This city is not what I expected. It is both fairer and fouler than I anticipated, if that makes sense." Marigold laughs and says, "Ha! It does make sense. I totally understand you. Davenar's an interesting place. It is, well, it is strong and powerful and full of life and fervor, but it is also a very dangerous place. There are lots of criminals wandering the streets. You better be careful that you keep your purse. I wouldn't want you to be unable to afford my drinks. I'd have to put you to work, you know." Ben chuckles and takes a few sips. Let's ask the fate chart something. Does Marigold, as the innkeeper here, have any information that Ben might find useful? I'm going to say it's likely. We have a chaos rank of 8. 43 is a yes. So she definitely has some useful information. What could that be? Let's roll action and subject. 51. Overindulge. And 18. The intellectual. Overindulge the intellectual. Now they've spent a couple days talking, and I think Ben has been open about his curiosity about Davenar, his curiosity about the city, and that he has shown himself to be educated. What information could she give to him that would help him on his mission? I mean, let's look at our threads. So we've got find and confront the Vidala family. We have to meet the Shade, who is their contact here. They've found a base of operations, so that's done. And he wants to discover the identity of the Hartvale ship. So maybe that's what he's talking about, because I don't think he wants to talk with her about their mission here and like hunting down the Vidala. Maybe he's asked questions about Mudside and she gets a little like quiet when sort of faced with questions about the disease that's going on over there, because it's not too far from here, and there's definitely some fear that it might spread across the canal and spread into the purse. So I don't think it's about the Vidala family or the sickness that's going on or any of that stuff. So I think it's got to be about this Hartvale ship. So maybe he asks her the question of like, how would I go about finding out information about ships moored in the harbor? Surely there must be a record of them kept somewhere. And she would know where this record might be kept. So we've got Tower Luminous, which is the sort of merchant district located next to the harbor. There are harbor masters that rule that district with an iron fist. And any ships that enter the harbor are marked in their registers. So I think she is going to tell Ben about this and be like, well, you probably want to go talk to one of the harbor masters. They would be able to tell you any ship in the harbor, who they might belong to, and whatever information you might want to know. But I'd be careful with them, young man. They are very particular about who gets their information. Ben looks up at her and smiles and says, is there any particular way that I could get into their good graces? I think at this, Marigold uncharacteristically places her elbows on the bar and leans in towards him, and in a somewhat conspiratorial voice says, my dear, in Davenar, the universal language is coin. Pass some coin to any of those harbor masters and they will sing like your canaries. That's all you need to know. And then she looks down at his whiskey and says, do you want another one? And I think that's probably a good place to end that scene as we, I think, take a look at our threads again here. I'm going to update that to speak with a harbor master about the ship. We need to meet the Shade operative. And as much as I think Ben would like to pursue this lead to go speak to a harbor master about the ship, finding the Shade operative and getting whatever information they have about the Vidala is the next phase of this operation. And because Erdira is the one who was sent to sort of put them in contact with this Shade operative operating in Davenar, I think it makes sense for Ben, Arid, and Orchid to be the ones to accompany her to that meeting. So I think that is going to be our next scene setup, which is meet with the Shade operative. And this is going to be a chaos factor of 7. We're going to drop the chaos factor down from 8 to 7 to represent sort of the controlled nature of finding that base of operations. And then Ben gaining some information from Marigold, the innkeeper at the Shivering Swan. And let's go ahead and roll our D10 and see how this scene setup plays out. 7, which equals the chaos factor, so this is an altered scene. So I think meeting with the Shade operative is the goal, and I think my original intention behind that was basically find the Shade operative. I think the Shade operative finds them. That makes more sense to me, because there's probably more sort of like rumors and things going around that the Crest have arrived here. Because, again, the Crest are a fairly well-known mercenary company in the world. So I think there are probably people who have now found out that the Crest are here, and there are definitely some who are interested in what the Crest are up to. And so that information has probably passed to this Shade operative who is operating in Davenar. So the question then, I think, is where does this Shade operative find them? Does the Shade operative come to the Shivering Swan, or does the Shade operative find them somewhere else in the city? So as I'm looking at my little map here, I think that it makes sense for them to be patrolling. Maybe Erdira receives a message, and that message is to meet somewhere in the Crates. And the Crates is this district of Davenar that is full of warehouses, and there are all sorts of storage spaces where minerals and other resources that are pulled out of Brezia's Gap, which is basically this massive hole in the middle of the island that descends down into the core of the island. Because again, Davenar is a small island and it's a big city. And so they built up into the sky and they built down below the ground. And so there is a city that exists underneath the ground in the bedrock of this island. And so the crates is this area that is between the harbor and this gap, sort of like right in the center of the island, where all of these various merchant vessels and everything that are bringing goods in, their goods can be transported and stored there, and then resources from within the island itself can be pulled out and stored there as well. Erdira receives this message to meet in a specific place in the crates. And so with Ben, Arid, and Orchid, she leaves the Shivering Swan one morning, and they begin making their way towards the crates. But before they even reach the crates, I think we should go ahead and roll to determine if they realize that they're being followed. Because again, as I pointed out last episode, Destrian Vidala knows where they're operating out of and has been following them. So this is going to be their chance to see if they know that they are being followed. I think based on the fact that we've got 4 pretty sort of well-trained individuals here, I'm going to say that it is likely that they notice that they are being followed. So chaos rank of 7, here we go. 0-9, which is an extreme yes. So I think they are walking maybe a couple blocks away from the Shivering Swan when Erdira sort of looks over at Ben and says, I think we're being followed. Ben nods and says, no, we are definitely being followed. Have been since we left the Swan. The question is, who is following us? And because this is an exceptional yes, are they going to try and set a trap for whoever's following them? This could be a huge turnaround because it is Destrian Vidala. I think I have made that clear. I can't weasel out of that and say that he's sent somebody else to follow them. So are they going to try and trap Destrian? I think it's likely. In fact, I think it's a sure thing that they're going to try and trap him. 33, which is a yes and also a random event. So let's sort of bank that random event and let us go ahead and resolve this right now. They're walking along. Ben says, let's hurry up and turn this corner. I will slip away. The 3 of you continue on, and I'll see if I can slip around behind and follow who's following us. They agree, and Ben kind of moves in such a way that he is standing in front of Orchid in a way that Orchid is basically blocking Destrian's view of them. So it won't be immediately obvious when they turn the corner that there are only 3 instead of 4 walking along. And so we should make a roll here. Let's go ahead and look at our moves. We've got Like a Shadow in the Darkness. When you're being chased, searched for, or otherwise trying to make yourself scarce or unseen, roll plus steady. On a hit, you are out of sight and may choose from the list below. So we're going to roll 2d6 plus 3. Here we go. 10 on the dice plus 3 is a 13. So it is a hit. So on a 10 plus, choose 2 of the following. Those looking for you position themselves within striking distance. Those looking for you mistake someone else for you. Those looking for you are distracted by something else that's equally pressing. You stumble across something interesting or important as you hide or escape. So I get to pick 2 of these. I think those looking for you position themselves within striking distance. That makes sense to me. And then also stumble across something interesting and important as you hide or escape. So they turn this corner, and as soon as they turn the corner, Ben darts from the group into a sort of archway and quickly ducks into the shadows, maybe crouches down behind some crates. And I think it's early enough in the morning that the streets are not packed full, but there's definitely traffic coming and going. I think he's able to do it so quickly and so stealthily that nobody notices that he's basically hiding behind this stack of crates. The three of them continue walking, and then the hooded figure turns the corner and continues to follow them down. Ben sees this figure pass by, and I think he is going to be able to like slip out and follow the person who's following them. The second option here is that we stumble across something interesting or important as you hide or escape. Does that mean that he knows that this is Destrian? Because I think it's possible that he sees something that lets him know that this is a cultist of Vargosh, as opposed to it being the Shade Operative. Because it's very possible that this is the Shade Operative that they're going to meet, tracking them. So I don't think that Ben is instantly like, I'm going to stick a dagger in this guy and then leave him to die here. It's more of, I want to know who's following us and why. Does he see something that makes him realize that this is a cultist of Vargosh? I think it's 50-50. Cast rank of 7. 81 is a no. So that's not what he sees that's an interesting or important. You know what? I know what the interesting or important thing is, which is he sees this person walk past. And then Ben slips out from the shadows and begins following this hooded figure. And as he does so, I think he sees somebody watching him. And he looks really quickly at this person, and it's just a street urchin that is like sitting on the sidewalk. But there is something not necessarily unnerving in this kid's expression, but just the intelligence behind the eyes of like watching his movements. And Ben is sort of like distracted for a moment as he's wondering, what is this kid up to? What is this kid looking at? Is he just looking at some stranger who's walking down the street? Or is he looking at someone that he, like recognizes? Like there's some form of recognition in this face. Ben sort of like looks back ahead to make sure that the hooded figure is still unaware of his presence, and then spares a glance back at that kid, and the kid is gone. Like just disappeared. Ben is unsettled, I think, by this, but he doesn't detect looking around any other dangers or that there's anyone else following him after he started following this hooded figure. So he sort of puts it out of his mind for the moment and continues to pursue Destrian. He succeeded, so I don't think Destrian has a chance of like knowing that he's there. So the question is, when do they spring this trap? I think there's another sort of corner that they're going to. Maybe it's even like crossing under a bridge. And I think as they cross under that bridge, and then as the hooded figure enters, and then Ben follows, he is going to run up behind Destrian, kick his knee out, and drive him to the ground, draw a blade across his throat, and try to basically grab him. So we're going to use another move here, which is their eyes never open. Once per session, when you attempt to silently abduct or kill an NPC who is reasonably within your ability to reach, roll plus steady. Once again, 2d6 plus 3 here. 8 on the dice plus 3 is an 11. So on a 10 plus, choose 2. It is clean and quiet. No one sees or hears a thing. It goes exactly as planned. Your target is killed, abducted exactly as you want. You didn't leave anything behind, or you leave behind a calling card. So I get to choose 2. And I am going to choose it's clean and quiet. No one sees or hears a thing. And also you didn't leave anything behind. So I think what happens is instead of like kicking his knee out and holding a blade to his throat, is Ben kicks his knee out and then clubs him over the back of the head and knocks him unconscious. He lets out a small whistle and the other three come running back. And they grab a hold of this figure and drag him away. Now, maybe they're sort of walking along this area towards the crates, and there is, again, this sort of canal that they're walking along. And the bridge that they were walking under is for a street above, because, again, Davenar is built on top of itself. So there are layers upon layers of streets and buildings and built up stonework that crosses over itself. And then there's another layer of the city. So it's a very compact, dense place. And they grab this figure and they find a little sort of alcove under this bridge. And they drag him in there. And I think they pull back the hood and look at this unconscious face. And do they recognize him? I don't believe that Ben, Arid, or Orchid ever met Destrian specifically, but he looks like his sister, who Ben and Arid definitely met. I'm going to say there's no way that they recognize him, but that's still a 35% chance with a chaos factor of 7. So here we go. 61 is a no. So no, they don't recognize him. So he is just some like big muscular guy that got clubbed over the back of the head and is unconscious and who is following them. And so I think they going to try and get back to the Swan without being seen with this prisoner? Because they can't just stay here in this alcove. There is still enough traffic sort of like moving back and forth. So, yeah, maybe that's the question. Is there a cart or something that they could steal readily available that they could use to transport this person back to the Shivering Swan? And I think it's impossible. I mean, this is going to be super, super hard. 15% chance. 18, which is a no. Oh, man, I think maybe they just do that sort of Weekend at Bernie's, put the hood over his head, Orchid sort of hefts him up, and then maybe Ben slips an arm under the other side, and they're going to try and walk out of this alcove, walk back towards the Swan, and act as though they're carrying someone who is drunk as opposed to someone who has been knocked unconscious. And I think to do that, they're going to have to... I don't know. I mean, this sounds like a phased arrest, doesn't it? To do something difficult where your ability to do so is seriously in question. Roll plus steady. Ben is, again, sort of leading this action here. So he is going to roll plus steady, which is plus 3. They're trying to pass without a trace here. Ooh, 4 on the dice plus 3 is a 7. So on a 7 and 9, you flinched, stalled, or hesitated. The MC will pick one or two of the following and tell you what it will look like if you take it. You can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. You achieve your goal, but only partially. You cannot achieve your goal, but can do something similar instead. I mean, it's got to be you can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. And I think the price is that somebody sees and they don't make it back secretly. I don't think it's one of the gray scarves, because a gray scarf would stop them and be like, what's going on here? I think news gets back to the Vidala and probably to Cleofa that her brother has been captured by the Crest. And so I think that is going to lead her to take action sooner than they were planning to. Because again, the Crest have been here for maybe 3 days at this point. The Vidala have been planning something. They've been planning to take action against their enemies. They know they're here. But I think Cleofa is preparing to take action now sooner rather than later in order to rescue her brother. Now, we had a random event happen back there, so let's go back to that and resolve that real quickly. And that might tie into what's going on here. So let's determine the event focus. 22, NPC action. Look at our list of NPCs here. Roll a d10. 3, the Vidala family. Okay, perfect. So the Vidala family are going to take an action. 5, recruit. 92, animals. Recruit animals. Are they using some dark ritual to summon and like corrupt animals in the city to serve as spies and potentially as weapons? Maybe. Let's ask the fate chart. I think it's likely. Cast factor 7. 46 is a yes. We see this quick scene of, I think, Cleofa. I definitely think this is a Cleofa thing, and more so than her mother, because her mother is focused on finding this well of power. And so we see that temple, and then we see sort of a building to the side of the temple, and Cleofa is there, and I think she is in simple clothing, sitting in a drawn ash circle, and she is chanting and sort of making these arcane gestures as creatures, rats, mice, maybe even larger or smaller creatures are filtering in. Okay, so this is like recruit animals, but could that be something beyond just sort of normal animals? Could she be summoning a creature to help her rescue her brother? Is Cleofa summoning some form of creature? I'm going to say it's 50-50. 46 again, which is a yes. So these rats and mice and other small critters, they've been using as spies, but spies aren't enough. They need forces. They need something to unleash. And so I think we just get this brief scene of her. I'm going to revise this. She's sitting outside of the circle, and she has this ash circle drawn on the center of the floor. She's chanting. She's making these arcane gestures. She's reaching into and tapping into the talent within her and pouring that into this circle. And this rift opens up in the ground, and this clawed hand kind of like comes out and grabs a hold of the planks of the floor of this building. And as this thing begins to emerge, the like camera, if you will, cuts to Cleofa's face, and she has this rapturous awe in her eyes and on her face as we can see the rift glowing against her skin, and then it goes dark. And then we go back to the Crest, having successfully returned this individual who was following them. And I think they're going to leave him there to be interrogated, but they still have a meeting to make. So they're going to head out once again, and they have successfully taken care of the one that was following them. And so they make their way to where they're supposed to meet this shade operative. And it is once again in the crates, this district full of warehouses. And so it's a little bit later in the morning now. There's a bustle of activity as carts and wagons are rolling in. These are specially designed wagons that are narrower than the ones that, you know, you might see in Heartvale. designed to pass through these cramped city streets. As they're walking along, I think there's a whistle, and Erdira recognizes it and looks over. There's a small alleyway between two of these warehouses where this figure is standing. And she gestures for the others. They cut down the street and head towards this figure. As they approach, the figure is taller, maybe 6'2", 6'3". He, much like the others who are sort of sons and daughters of Heartvale, has olive-toned skin, dark hair. It's not as sort of dark and curly as Ben's is. It's a little bit more straight. And he keeps it cut short. He is looking at Erdira, and as she enters the alleyway and draws close to him, he smiles a kind of lopsided grin and says, "Erdi, it's so good to see you," and opens his arms. Erdira hugs him and says, "Had, I'm so glad to see you. I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to find you in this city." "Haha, don't worry, Erdi. I would have found you. You're not that hard to find, walking in such company as this." And he turns to look at the three Crest soldiers and says, "Aren't you going to introduce me?" Erdira turns and says, "Ben, Arid, Orchid, this is Hadrius Decaro. He'll be our connection here." The Shade Operative smiles, again, that lopsided grin, and he says, "Well, Crest soldiers here in Davenar, welcome. Things are about to get a lot more interesting for you, I think. I have an invitation for you." Ben looks up at him and says, "An invitation? We're just here for information." "I know, and you'll get your information. But first, there's someone you should really meet." Ben, I think, feels a little bit of distrust. Maybe because of the familiarity between Erdira and this Hadrius Decaro. Maybe because this individual is a spy who's been living in Davenar, and Ben has learned to trust Erdira. But just briefly interacting with this man reminds him that these are Shade. They're spies and liars and killers. And he doesn't know that he can trust this person, even though it seems that Erdira does. And so Ben says, Who do we have to meet?" Hadrius Decaro smiles, this time not lopsided, a full toothy grin. And he says, "Only the biggest crime lord in Davenar, Sydney Caliver. And she has asked for you all by name." Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thank you so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you want to support the show directly, leave me a review or buy me a coffee at coffee.com/errantadventures. That's ko-fi.com/errantadventures. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.